When will I be good enough to be all I wanna be? When you asked me earlier, who am I?
Yeah.
It's so complex to answer that, because I've finally come to this realization that as far as the I part goes, I think all of us, each of us, when we try to define that I, if we could see that we are just awareness and consciousness, and we present this awareness and consciousness that we might call our soul to the world in these bodies that we have, and we are energy. And I mean, some people might say, well, I am a mother, I am a nurse, I am a child, I'm a doctor, I'm a filmmaker. Those are all the ways we express our consciousness to the world. So I guess trying to help people understand that because we weren't born, we really don't die. We've always been this just state of essence and consciousness and beautiful awareness that we present to the world in these bodies, and they age and they get injured. And I guess more about helping people to come to that sense of acceptance that really this is just one part of the experience. And I think there are many more in this universal consciousness that some people call God, some people call Allah, some people they call it Jesus or their faith or their religion. And I don't know where we go when our consciousness decides that this is no longer a place that we can express it. I certainly don't know. I've had my own near-death experience twice. There was no light. I don't know what that means. I'm not a traditional religious person. I was raised in a traditional religion, albeit that was on my father's side. On my mother's side, she's Native American, so I got quite an odd balance of spirituality. So people ask me, well, you've had so much experience with death, where do people go? And I have no clue. I do know that one death experience I had that was probably the most profound I've ever had was with a young man named Kenny, who was in my burn unit. And Kenny spent about 6 months with us hacking him apart as a body. We hacked his legs off and then his arms. And I say it bluntly like that because that's how he saw what we were doing to him. And I remember with clarity, as if he were sitting where you are, when he looked at me and he had icy, not cold icy, but these icicle blue eyes that just were stunning out of his head. And I remember the day he looked at me and he said, "Why are you doing this to me? What are you getting out of this? What purpose will I serve in this state that you've left me in? I can't even be in a wheelchair. I can't even get around. So it's not like you've left me with anything." And he said, I want to die. And so we brought his family in and we asked him what he wanted. He told us everything that he wanted. And it was not often that he had such mental clarity. He would come and go in and out of consciousness because he was very sick after being burned. He was burned 95%, third-degree burns on his body. But I remember it was about 3 weeks before he died, and he told us what he wanted, and the only thing he wanted was for someone to open the window because we'd held him hostage so long in the room that he'd not seen the outdoors. And his family had made these beautiful recordings. They were in a band together, and they had sent us all these cassette tape recordings that we would play over and over. And he said, "I want you to play Celebrate, the song Celebrate, when you know I'm dying, and I want you to open that window because that's where I want to go, and I know that's where I'm going to go." And so the time came, and we knew he was dying, and his family came in. There was really no part of his body left to touch except his head. So his parents and his wife, Annie, had their hands on his head, and they were talking to him. And I just remember it. I didn't tell this story for many years because I was so afraid that people would think I was crazy. And so I sat down, and I don't know if you've been into an ICU where you've got the patient's bed and then you've got a counter and a sink, and then usually a window. And so there was a little place for me to sit. I just kind of sat up next to the sink by the window, and I watched the heart monitor as his heart started giving out, and so I knew it was very close. And we said our thank yous to Kenny. Nobody said goodbye. They just said thank you for being in this world with us when you were here, and it's okay to go. We're not begging you to stay. And so then all of a sudden this very, very strange experience started happening, where the room just became still. But it became still, if you can imagine walking into a tunnel where there's light on both ends of the tunnel. You go into the tunnel and there's light, and then there's light on the other end. But there's all this darkness around you, and it's just very quiet. And that was the feeling that I had when he started to die. And I sat there, and then I just closed my eyes, and there were all of these, not thoughts like I was thinking them happening, but there were these, and they weren't voices in my head, they were just these almost like memories, these things that were being spoken around me. And then I started seeing little snapshots of, they weren't like you close your eyes and imagine a picture you've seen. They were just, one was a couple, an older couple with a little boy, and then another one was an old farmhouse, and just these huge plains of wheat or something, and the room was just so still, and it was so quiet, and there was this incredible sense of wellness, of everything was good in the world, everything was perfect, there was nothing out of place, there was nothing wrong, and it just seemed endless. I wish that there were words to describe it, because I only pick from the words that we have in our vocabulary. There really aren't words to describe this place. And all of a sudden, I start hearing this just very low-level whine, and then I hear a woman very quietly sobbing. And I'm starting to realize, I opened my eyes, and I'm starting to realize that it's Kenny's mother, and she's weeping, and the sound that I'm hearing is the heart monitor. And I'm thinking in my mind, as things are starting to sort of come back to whatever normal is in this situation, and I'm thinking to myself, wait, if you don't cry, he'll stay in this room. Don't cry yet. And then she just was holding onto his head and weeping and just being with him. And then there was this wind, this presence, this air that just seemed to take all of that sense of peace and wellness and goodness and serenity, all of those things you think of. It's like when you're lying on your back and you're watching the clouds and everything is still and there's no sound, and you're watching the clouds. It's that sense. And it all just, in a second, was gone out of the window. And I think it probably lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it seemed like an eternity. And I had no clue what had just happened. I wasn't afraid of it, but I was certainly a bit taken aback by it. Just, what is this thing that has happened? And so after Kenny was gone, after his family had gone, I asked our psychiatrist in the room, I said, Walter, I have to tell you about this thing that happened to me. And so he did, and he sat down, and I told him, and he said, well, why don't you ask Kenny's parents about the people that you saw in this vision that you had? And I did. And the best they could come up with is that they had a photograph of Kenny when he was a young boy with his grandparents. And it was outside of an old farmhouse. They weren't sure, I couldn't give them enough detail that they could say, well, surely that's what you were describing. But Walter was convinced that it was some part of Kenny's essence or his consciousness moving through, and it was some part of his experience that we were all having in that room. Maybe some people would call it, you see your life flash before your eyes, or it was some part of the experience of Kenny dying that we were all sharing in that moment, and that's the part that I picked up on, was that part of him, as his soul was going on to travel whatever path was next for him. But I knew at that moment, that there was no thing about death. There was nothing, not one thing about death that was frightening. And from that day, I never, ever had one thought again about mortality in the sense that we traditionally think about it. And so when you ask me who am I think that is probably the closest I can define it, is that experience made it very clear to me and solidified what I'd always known, that I don't know if it's a healer, I don't know if it's a nurse, I don't know if it's a mother, but it's some part of all of that that makes this part of my experience and my consciousness. That's what defines it, I guess, in the human terms that you asked.